Well, we're ending things off with the most infamous game in the series, Metroid Other M. Out of all the games I've stayed away from, I figured I'd get this game eventually, and I'll say this before we start, everyone's pretty much right. For those who don't know, Metroid Other M was the game that pissed off everyone in the Metroid community for its abundance of story, Samus's characterization, as well as the very, very bad dialogue, script, and voice acting. But since everyone has already talked about how bad this game is, I'm going to do something different. Instead of talking about all the faults this game has, I'm going to try and figure out how this game could have been better, and if there's a potential remake that ever comes to fruition, maybe give all of these a thought. I mean, it's not like anyone's going to be watching this, but you never know. With that said, let's begin.
Baby. Babies cry. Babies cry.
Oh boy, this is going to be difficult. Okay, so it starts off with Samus getting a distress call from the Ball ship, a decommissioned space station. To her shock, she finds one of the Galactic Federation ships and later meets a squadron investigating an incident inside the space station. With the help of her trusty missiles, Adam, the leader of the troops, as well as Samus' former officer, requests Samus to help them out in their investigation. However, she will have to take orders from Adam in order to progress. With no hesitation, Samus agrees and refrains from using any of her tools. This is a huge point of contention with the game. Since Samus is a bounty hunter, she shouldn't really be taking any orders from her former officer, especially to an extent of restricting all of her arsenal. While I'll talk about why I'm mixed about that later on, I never really minded Adam here. For starters, while she may not be part of his squadron anymore, she still respects and trusts him, especially since she suspects him having more information about the mission in hand. Later on, he does talk about prohibiting tools such as the power bombs and super missiles. And since this is essentially a recon mission, it makes sense why Samus shouldn't be using these during her search for any survivors. With her other equipment, I don't entirely agree, but I'll get to there later. I think Adam being a part of the search isn't much of an issue. What I do have an issue on, however, is Samus' overall indifference and blind loyalty to Adam. She has her suspicions and is still doing her individual detective work at times, but sometimes her loyalty is straight up misguided at points. Actually, no, I'll get this out of the way. In Sector 3, or Pyrosphere, Samus is surviving the heat without activating her Varia suit, which is kind of weird because I thought she was wearing the Varia suit, that is the design anyway, and she doesn't get the idea to use it until Adam instructs her to do so. Hello? That's for your own protection. It does nothing but benefit. Why turn it off in the first place? This is my problem with the story as a whole. Samus blindly following orders when Samus would usually think and act accordingly on her own. I can get behind following the orders of her former mentor, a person that also knows about the situation in hand, but this is too much of an extreme. And again, this isn't a problem with Adam as a whole, since he is trying to locate and evacuate any survivors. But with how the script makes him as well as Samus react, it makes it uncomfortably disjointed. But that could also be the voice acting. Oh god, what happened with the direction. Ironically, Adam, and the best character in the game, Anthony, has some of the best voicing in the game. But that could be more of Anthony's charisma and Adam just being relatively deadpan that kind of helps it out. But Samus? Oh man. The first 5 minutes of the game at least were a headache. Listening to Samus' monotone got under my skin really quickly, and while it got slightly better, notably during her investigations, when she has to talk with other people or during flashbacks, it goes back to uncomfortable. Don't get me started on Adam's last scene. Samus sees a baby Metroid when she gets tranquilized by Adam. He informs Samus that the Metroids in the battleship are artificially created by the Galactic Federation as bioweapons, and in order to create the perfect weapons, they remove their only weakness to cold, except when they're infants, as Adam has demonstrated earlier. He tells Samus that he's going to detach the hatch that is containing the Metroids and take them out himself. Normally, Samus would just question everything, respect the other's wish, and move on, especially with the certain giant dragons roaming the ship. I'll get there later. But nope! Samus becomes a wailing woman instead of a stoic badass. Technically, this would be part of Samus' character, if you read the comics at least. There was a prequel manga that released in Japan in 2002. It showed Samus growing up from her childhood, her involvement with the Galactic Federation, and towards her life as a bounty hunter. Funnily enough, her personality is very similar to Other M, outside of the charming character, of course. There are bits and pieces sprinkled in. I love this scene, for example.
Any objections, Adam?
I love that. But those moments are far and few between, and I wish they took more from the manga in this game. Outside of the wailing and the Ridley fat. Oh, right! I completely forgot about this. So there's this rat thing we meet during the adventure, and we learn over time that it is able to evolve into this dragon thing. Gee, I wonder what it is. Okay, no, the joke doesn't work here. It's Ridley. And we actually meet it in its full form of murderous scorpion dragon thing we know and hate. Well, if you ask me, he's different enough to know that he isn't actually Ridley. Later on, we actually know he's a clone. But unfortunately, Samus doesn't know that, and...
This scene has a lot of potential. Like in the comics, they tried to tackle this in a way where Samus was seeing Ridley for the first time. The time where Ridley actually killed her parents, as well as the miners in the incident of... Actually, I don't remember the planet off the top of my head. And the fact that she's seeing her arch enemy actually survive a planet-sized explosion, I can see why she's experiencing PTSD in this scenario.
In case you don't know, Zebes, the location of the original Metroid as well as Super Metroid, got completely destroyed and we know Ridley couldn't have survived. In fact, the game states that Ridley has been destroyed in the destruction of Zebes, despite Ridley seemingly surviving every other encounter. In the manga, he actually explains much of why Ridley survives. In fact, it's super dark. After the explosion following in the murder of Samus' parents, Ridley repairs himself by eating the remains of the miners as nutrients. So I can see this monster surviving in a similar way, maybe from the other space pirates. But I'm pretty sure you can't survive that way when the entire planet explodes, meaning everything is gone. And seeing Samus' reaction would make sense, seeing her arch enemy intact.
And while I can see this scene working, here's why it doesn't.
First off, like I said, Ridley is different enough to Ridley's previous incarnations, but Samus doesn't know that, and she forgets the fact that she's beaten this guy at least 6 times already. Also, the scene doesn't work because, while her outburst in the comic made sense, later on she actually overcomes her fear of Ridley during the Zero mission. So this really shouldn't shake her up for 2 straight minutes. And it's longer than that until the fight with Ridley starts up. It's not just annoying, it takes way too long. Thankfully, Anthony is here to help out with Samus' Seriously, a tail slap. The murderous scorpion dragon has a sharp tip, and he uses it to slap Anthony into the lava. That's honestly the most disappointing part of this scene, personally. Also, we have voice actors for everyone in this game except Ridley, who, I know I'm going to talk about this again, has been talking in the comics and the manga along with Samus. I am absolutely appalled. Actually, no, with this kind of voice acting, I think that's probably for the best. That's basically as much story as I'm going to talk about, mostly because, A, there really isn't much else to talk about, and I just want to say there is good stuff about the story, there's just way too much of it, which made the game drag at points. And if they tweaked the script and voice acting, I would think it would have been tolerable. And B, I had to suffer along with this, so if you want to know what happens, you have to suffer yourself. Story aside, I do think Other M succeeds in other areas. The game looks legitimately good for the Wii, and the soundtrack goes for both energetic as well as ambient pieces, and for the most part, they pull it off super well. Level design is basic, but effective, even if there are more hallways than open spaces, which, oh well. Well, actually, I shouldn't say everything is smooth. The gameplay, I'll be honest, is a little weird. When talking about the normal control, the only option you have is the Wiimote on the side. No nunchuck, no classic controller, just a Wiimote with the D-pad for a 3D adventure game. Granted, it feels fine for the most part, but you couldn't use the nunchuck at least. You'd also have more options if you had one too, because most of the shit you got was for 4 buttons. And the B button doesn't do anything. You have the jump, beam, and morph ball mapped to the 1, 2, and B buttons respectively. So what about the rest? The only way you're using missiles is through the Wii sensor and only for enemies and certain doors. Don't like that? Too bad, because that's all you're doing with those. And it may just be me, but the sensor is so jittery. Look at the fight with this thing. It's like trying to kill a fly with a laser beam. And going to the pointer mode is janky as well, especially during combat. Switching modes while fighting a moving target makes you so vulnerable, and it becomes a practice of patience at that point. I think the items could have been a little more comfortable with the nunchuck. The missiles being switched like previous games, having the grappling hook mapped to its own button, hell, have the new concentration mode mapped to a button. So one of the big changes was the exclusion of pickups. You cannot get energy or weapon drops from enemies in this game, and the concentration mode alleviates that, where you stand still and recharge missiles and energy when you're at critical health. And honestly, it's such a broken system. You still need to watch your surroundings, but you really can't die whenever you're able to use it. The dodging also helps with that, where if you tap the D-pad, you'll dodge practically everything. My only deaths mostly came from the fact I dodged at the wrong time or at those do-or-die situations. Really, Other M is actually an easy game once you figure out what you need to do. Though there are times where the solution is very cryptic, and the last two fights are so victim to that. With the Queen Metroid, the first phase is trying to fight the babies, and all you can do is freeze them and shoot missiles at them. But since you're fighting 5 of the bastards, killing them is an endurance test. And the actual fight with the Queen really makes me angry since most of my hits feel like they couldn't connect. And Madeline Bergman, the Dead or Alive character that was specifically made for this game, I'm pretty sure of that. Damn, a lot of this game really made me think of Dead or Alive thinking about it. I guess that's thanks to Team Ninja's involvement. But going back to Madeline Bergman, or MB for short, she was the artificial intelligence to match Mother Brain in order to keep control of the Metroids. One of the later found survivors, the real Madeline Bergman, explains how the artificial intelligence went mad and decided to take out the scientists after trying to reprogram her for disagreeing with them. And with that, the fight with MB is about as bullshit empathetic as you can get. At first, I thought you had to fight the bugs and take them out, but because of the game's lovely lock-on feature, seriously, this was horrendous, you actually had to lock on to MB during the fight with the alien bugs and the Galactic Federation, and it takes the fight 5 seconds to beat. This was between 2 cutscenes that were 15-minute and 10-minute respectively, by the way. Man, I feel like this was a mess to talk about. After Anthony showing he's alive, no shocker, Samus, Anthony, and Madeline get away from the bottle ship and the game ends.
Anthony sighed as he muttered.
Well, that was a disappointment. Though I'm a little more mixed than anything. While the gameplay is perfectly fine, I think they really needed the nunchuck or the Pro Controller to really make the control a little more comfortable and a lot less restricting. The story is a huge mess, but there are points in this story that I would think are really, really good. I like how Samus does the investigation for the most part, and also reacts at the events that are happening at that moment. Adam is fine, Anthony's fine, the others are filler for the most part. But other than that, it has the potential to be a good story, but it just falls flat. But if it was retooled enough, I think it would have been passable, especially for a Metroid game. And while this game had a lot of potential, a lot of it was unfortunately wasted, and if they ever do rework this game again, rework a lot of this stuff. Rework the story, rework the dialogue, the script, the characterization, the gameplay. Having to use the Wii Remote on its side is not comfortable, and it's not convenient. And I think whatever they can do with anything else outside of like the Joy-Con sideways, that would be a freaking nightmare. I think they would have a lot of possibilities to make an actual good remake of this game. Probably not going to happen, but oh well. You know, I'm just going to play Super Metroid. I want to actually play a good game for once.